The emergency room lights were harsh, sterile, and unforgiving. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the faint tang of disinfected metal, and the soft hum of ventilators provided an eerie undertone to the chaos of human panic and suffering. David Sterling burst through the sliding doors, his expensive shoes clicking urgently against the linoleum. He held the trembling form of Lily Monroe, the woman he had been carrying on a secret affair with for months. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and her hand clutched his sleeve with unexpected desperation. He was a man used to control, a man whose wealth had smoothed over crises, whose power had silenced conflicts, whose charm had always opened doors. Yet here, in the brightly lit corridor of the ER, none of that mattered. He was helpless. "Please," he whispered, voice strained. "She's having severe pains. Something's wrong. Just help her." A nurse rushed toward them, clipboard in hand, and guided them to a triage bed. David followed, holding her hand like it might keep her alive. He barked information, rattling off medications she had taken, recent symptoms, all while trying to maintain a composed front. Every second stretched unbearably, each one heavier than the last. And then he saw her, standing quietly behind the sliding doors, framed by the hospital's morning light, was Emily Sterling, his wife. 8 months pregnant, her hand lightly resting on her belly, face calm yet alert. She had been there the entire time, silent, unnoticed, witnessing everything. For a heartbeat, time froze. David's eyes locked with hers. Shock, recognition, and an unspoken question passed between them. Her gaze was not filled with panic, not even anger, only a quiet, icy disappointment that cut deeper than any confrontation could. In that single moment, David realized that the emergency wasn't just about Lily. It was about the consequences he had been ignoring, the life he had promised, the vows he had broken, and the woman who had carried his child silently while he risked everything on deception. And for the first time that morning, he felt powerless. David's panic had driven every decision up to this point, but now, confronted with Emily's steady, piercing gaze, panic transformed into something heavier, dread. He had rehearsed explanations in his head 1,000 times over the past months, imagining scenarios in which Lily's emergency could be handled discreetly, away from prying eyes. But nothing had prepared him for the pregnant wife standing quietly in the ER corridor, observing every move. Emily stepped forward slowly, her boots barely making a sound on the polished floor. The hospital staff, sensing tension, gave them space, assuming the couple had a complicated dynamic. They didn't realize the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Lily, still clutching David's sleeve, looked between the two of them. Confusion and fear clouded her face. She whispered, barely audible, "Who?" David hesitated. Every instinct screamed to shield her, to explain, to control the narrative. But Emily didn't need explanations. Her eyes already told the story, the betrayal, the secrecy, the recklessness. "You need to step aside," Emily said, her voice calm, almost too calm. There was no accusation, just authority. And it landed like a hammer. David's throat went dry. He couldn't move, couldn't respond. The months of arrogance and denial, the late nights, the lies, now all collapsed into a single unbearable moment of clarity. Emily walked past him, her hand brushing against the edge of his arm, not in warmth, but as if to mark territory. She approached the triage nurse with confidence, requesting updates about Lily's vitals. Her focus was not on vengeance. It was on truth, control, and the life she carried. David realized then that he had never truly understood the depth of her resilience. While he had been consumed with fear and chaos, she had been composed, observant, and unwavering. He followed silently, every step a reminder that he no longer led. Emily Sterling, carrying their child, had the power now. And David's panic, once absolute, now felt small, foolish, and insufficient. The nurses moved efficiently around them, taking Lily's vitals, inserting IVs, and preparing monitors, while David hovered nervously at her side. Every beep of the heart monitor felt like a judgment, each pulse a reminder of his recklessness. Emily remained silent, but her presence was deafening. She didn't raise her voice, didn't confront him verbally, but every glance she cast cut through him with surgical precision. David felt exposed, as if every misstep, every lie, every late-night phone call and secret meeting had been illuminated by her quiet observation. Lily, oblivious to the tension between the two, continued to clutch David's sleeve, eyes wide, lips trembling. "I'm scared," she whispered. David opened his mouth to reassure her, but Emily's gaze held him in place. No words would suffice. The reassurance he thought he could provide suddenly felt hollow, meaningless. Emily knelt beside the triage bed for a moment, her hand gently resting on Lily's arm, not in accusation, but in subtle assertion of authority. "She's stable," Emily said softly to the nurse, "but keep monitoring closely." Her words were precise, controlled, commanding respect. David's heart sank further. He realized that Emily had stepped into a role he had never acknowledged: protector, observer, and silent judge. All the power he had relied on, wealth, influence, charm, meant nothing in this sterile room. He remembered the nights he had ignored her calls, dismissed her concerns, and left her alone while he indulged in secrecy. Every careless choice had led to this confrontation, and the weight of it now pressed on him like a physical force. As the nurses prepared Lily for observation, Emily stood tall again, her hand instinctively on her belly, signaling not just protection for herself, but for their unborn child. David understood the truth in that moment. He had endangered more than a mistress' well-being. He had jeopardized the balance of his entire life, and Emily was quietly reclaiming it. Power was no longer his. Presence, vigilance, and clarity belonged to her. And for the first time, David Sterling felt truly powerless. Time slowed in the ER corridor. David remained frozen, staring at Emily as she moved with calm authority, her hand resting lightly on her belly. Every movement purposeful. The world he had known, the one he could control with charm, money, and decisive action, no longer existed in this room. The triage nurse glanced at him, sensing his unease. "Sir, could you please step back for a moment?" she said politely. David nodded automatically, but didn't move. His eyes followed Emily as she spoke quietly with the attending physician, asking detailed questions about Lily's symptoms and medical history. Her focus was clinical, precise, and unwavering. There was no drama, no hysteria, just sharp intelligence and care. David felt a sting of shame. He had always believed that being a provider and a protector was his domain alone. Money, influence, and connections had defined him. He had assumed Emily's pregnancy made her dependent, vulnerable, and in need of his guidance. He had been wrong. He noticed the small, subtle gestures, the way Emily's eyes scanned the monitors, her hand never left her belly, how she leaned slightly toward Lily without intrusion, commanding presence without arrogance. Each movement reminded him that she had been silently watching, assessing, and preparing for this moment long before he realized it. Lily squeezed David's hand again, looking confused and anxious. He tried to offer reassurance, but Emily's gaze stopped him. Not with anger, but with quiet authority, a reminder that this was no longer his world alone. Finally, David exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, he understood something fundamental. Control was an illusion. Presence, awareness, and unwavering attention were far more valuable than any sum of money or charm. Emily Sterling wasn't just standing in the corridor. She was reclaiming her space, asserting her boundaries, and silently demanding respect, not for herself alone, but for the life she carried. And David Sterling, the man who had once thought he held all the cards, realized in a heartbeat that he had been outplayed in the most intimate, consequential way imaginable. David's panic shifted into desperation. Every instinct screamed to regain control, to explain, to apologize, to somehow rewrite the past few months of recklessness and secrecy. But standing in the ER corridor, he realized that words alone would not fix what had already been exposed. Emily didn't turn to him. She didn't need to. Her calm focus was magnetic, drawing attention away from his theatrics and toward the real priority, Lily's well-being. He watched helplessly as she asked the nurse about potential complications, gestational health, and the best precautions to take. Every question was measured, informed, and authoritative. He noticed subtle changes in Lily's condition too. Her pulse steadied, and the tremors in her hands slowed slightly, partly due to the medical attention, partly because Emily's presence introduced a stabilizing force he could not replicate. David realized in that moment that he had been counting on his own superficial charms and wealth, but they offered nothing here. What mattered was clarity, empathy, and composure, qualities Emily possessed in abundance. David's mind raced back to the gala, the late-night meetings, and the countless times he had ignored Emily's calls, her gentle requests for attention, her subtle hints that something was amiss. The pattern was undeniable. He had underestimated her, not as a spouse, but as a force capable of observation, action, and unwavering protection. Lily, now calmer, gave him a weak smile. "Thank you for bringing me," she whispered, unaware of the silent judgment he was receiving from Emily's gaze. David nodded, but the acknowledgement felt hollow. He realized that this moment, standing frozen, powerless, exposed, was more than a wake-up call. It was a reckoning. The illusions of control he had relied upon for so long had crumbled. Emily, his pregnant wife, had quietly claimed authority in a world he thought he dominated. David's chest tightened with the weight of realization. The ER lights seemed brighter, more revealing, as if illuminating the depth of his mistakes. For the first time, he felt what it truly meant to be powerless and to understand the consequences of betrayal. Minutes stretched into an eternity. David hovered by Lily's bedside, still tense, still trying to gauge the gravity of her condition. The nurses moved efficiently, but he felt entirely out of place. Every beep from the monitors seemed amplified in his ears, echoing like judgment. Emily, meanwhile, remained calm, observing the staff, checking notes, and occasionally offering succinct instructions. Her presence was not only commanding but protective. She positioned herself subtly between David and Lily, a gentle barrier that communicated without words. "This is her domain, and you are a visitor." David's mind replayed every moment that led him here, the secret calls, the nights spent hiding, the promises he had broken. He had thought that concealment would preserve peace, that his charm and wealth could smooth over any cracks. Yet, here he was, powerless, realizing that wealth could not buy respect or forgiveness in the face of genuine accountability. Lily's hand trembled slightly in his. He tightened his grip instinctively, but Emily's glance reminded him to release some of the tension he had been carrying. Her composure was contagious. He had to admit, silently, that she had always been the stronger one, even when he had ignored it. Finally, the doctor approached. "She's stable for now," he said, "but we need to keep her under observation for a few hours. No complications, but caution is necessary." Emily nodded once and turned to David. Her expression was even, neutral, but there was a sharpness to her eyes that made him swallow hard. "Make sure she rests." "I expect no interference," she said quietly. David nodded, feeling both chastened and awakened. He understood now that his role was not to lead in this scenario but to support, to observe, and to acknowledge the authority Emily naturally possessed. As he stepped back slightly, he realized the weight of the truth. The woman he had taken for granted, the one he had thought dependent on his presence, had quietly become the stabilizing force, the anchor, for everyone in this chaotic, frightening moment. And for the first time, David Sterling felt what it truly meant to stand powerless in front of someone he had underestimated. Hours passed slowly in the ER, each minute stretching David's anxiety thinner. Lily rested in the observation bed, connected to monitors and IVs, occasionally glancing at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Yet, despite all the medical attention, he found himself watching Emily more than anyone else. She moved with an effortless authority, adjusting blankets, asking precise questions, and calmly reviewing charts. Her voice was soft but confident, carrying no judgment, yet every word reinforced the reality he could no longer ignore. She had claimed control in a way he never had. David's mind raced through every misstep, every whispered excuse, every broken promise. Every night, he chose his mistress over the woman who had supported him through years of life and loss. He had assumed he was indispensable, that his wealth and influence gave him ultimate power. But here, none of that mattered. Emily's presence alone commanded respect and action. He noticed subtle gestures that pierced him deeper than any words. The way she rested her hand protectively on her growing belly, the slight narrowing of her eyes whenever he tried to speak, the calm patience that contrasted sharply with his frantic energy. She was fully aware of him, not just of what he had done, but of the chaos he had wrought, yet she maintained control, a quiet demonstration of her strength. Lily, now stable, drifted into an uneasy rest. David sank into a chair, shoulders slumping, realizing he had no control over the situation. No amount of money, influence, or charm could replace the grounded authority Emily naturally exuded. In that sterile hospital room, the truth settled in him like ice water. He had been reckless, selfish, and blind. And the woman he had dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated was the one holding the reins now, not with anger, but with steadfast composure, ensuring the safety of everyone in the room. David's chest tightened. For the first time, he truly understood power in its purest form: presence, responsibility, and unwavering resolve. And he had been absent from it for far too long. By late afternoon, the ER had quieted slightly. Visitors had filtered out, nurses had rotated shifts, and the fluorescent lights hummed with steady monotony. David remained at Lily's bedside, but his earlier panic had dulled into a gnawing awareness of the consequences of his choices. Emily remained near the corner, calm and poised, yet every movement she made radiated authority. She checked Lily's monitors, adjusted blankets, and gave instructions to the staff with precision. Her hand, resting lightly over her belly, symbolized something David hadn't fully grasped until now. The protection of life, both hers and their child's, was her priority, above all else. David's eyes darted between Emily and Lily. The woman he had secretly carried on illicit dinners, whispered conversations, and stolen nights seemed distant now, not just physically, but morally. He had brought her into this sterile, critical space, believing his wealth and urgency could shield her from harm, only to realize he was powerless in comparison to Emily's unwavering presence. Emily finally looked at him, her gaze steady, almost expectant. No words were needed. The silent communication was enough. She had observed, she had judged, and she had quietly reclaimed authority. David felt a pang of humility, sharper than any reprimand could ever be. He noticed the subtle details he had overlooked for months: the calm way Emily's hand rested over her belly, the careful tone she used with medical staff, the way her eyes scanned every chart, every monitor, every small indicator of health. She had never been powerless. He had been blind. David finally exhaled, realizing that this moment, the panic, the emergency, the confrontation, had stripped him of illusion. He had depended on charm, money, and influence, but here, in the stark fluorescent light of the ER, none of that mattered. He understood, for the first time, that real power came from presence, awareness, and unwavering attention. Emily Sterling, pregnant, calm, and resolute, had demonstrated it all in silence, leaving him to reconcile his failures and to confront the stark reality. He was powerless without her. As evening settled over the city, the ER corridor grew quieter. The frantic energy of the morning had subsided, leaving only the soft beeping of monitors and the distant murmur of hospital staff. David remained at Lily's side, but his confidence had eroded into a heavy, uncomfortable humility. Emily moved with quiet precision, attending to the final checks on Lily. Every motion she made was deliberate, a subtle authority that left no doubt about who was in control. She asked the nurse precise questions about Lily's medication, observed vitals, and ensured the patient's comfort. Her hand rested on her belly, a constant reminder of the life she carried and the stakes she represented. David's panic and desperation had faded into reflection. He recalled the countless nights he had chosen his own convenience, secrecy, and desire over responsibility and commitment. Each memory weighed heavily now, magnified by Emily's silent, unwavering presence. Lily, sensing the shift in the room, relaxed slightly. Her breaths became steadier, her grip on David's hand loosening. She looked between them with a mix of gratitude and confusion, unaware of the full magnitude of the unspoken tension. Emily finally turned to David, her expression composed yet piercing. She didn't need to lecture or shout. The mere steadiness of her gaze communicated everything: awareness, judgment, and authority. David felt the gravity of his misjudgments crash upon him all at once. He realized he had assumed control in situations where he had none, believing that wealth, influence, and charm could substitute for presence and integrity. Emily had demonstrated a quiet power he had never truly understood, a power rooted in attention, responsibility, and unwavering commitment. For the first time, David Sterling comprehended what it meant to be powerless. He had created chaos with his choices, yet Emily's calm composure held the situation together. He understood now that real strength was not in command or control, but in presence, vigilance, and steadfastness. And in that moment, standing in the stark light of the ER, he knew that everything he had taken for granted, trust, respect, and partnership, had to be earned, and it began with acknowledging her power. By nightfall, the ER had quieted almost completely. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow across the sterile floors. Lily had been stabilized and was resting comfortably under observation, her panic replaced by cautious relief. David remained near her, exhausted, his expensive suit rumpled, hair disheveled, and hands clammy from hours of helpless worry. Emily stood nearby, calm, composed, and unwavering. The pregnant glow that had always carried a quiet strength now radiated authority. She had overseen every detail, from Lily's vitals to the triage instructions, from coordinating with the nurses to making subtle adjustments that ensured no risk was left unmonitored. Every step she had taken exuded competence, clarity, and control. David's mind raced with the enormity of his mistakes. Months of secretive indulgence, deception, and misplaced arrogance had led to this moment, a confrontation he hadn't anticipated. He had thought that money, charm, and influence could protect him, but none of it mattered here. His panic was impotent. Emily's presence, calm and deliberate, had become the anchor for everyone in the room. Finally, Emily approached him. Her hand rested lightly on her belly as she looked at him directly, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a quiet, unwavering clarity that pierced through every excuse he could muster. "Do you understand what you've risked?" she asked, her tone measured. David nodded, unable to find words that would suffice. He realized that true accountability wasn't about defense or justification. It was about recognition and learning. Emily had shown him, without a single raised voice, what it meant to be present, to act responsibly, and to prioritize life over desire or convenience. As the nurse gave the final checks and ensured Lily was stable, Emily placed a gentle hand on David's shoulder. Not a comfort, but a mark of clarity. "This isn't just about her," she said softly. "It's about the life we're bringing into this world. And that requires vigilance, respect, and truth." David felt a weight lift, though it was heavy with humility. For the first time, he understood what it truly meant to be powerless, and what it meant to rely on someone whose strength and clarity surpassed his own. He watched Emily walk back to Lily's bedside, guiding, protecting, and commanding the space with grace and authority. In that moment, David Sterling understood the depth of his misjudgment. The mistress he had panicked over was a fleeting concern, but his wife, pregnant, composed, and formidable, had quietly demonstrated a power that no wealth, charm, or panic could ever replicate. And as the night deepened, he realized that the reckoning was only beginning, a reckoning that would reshape not just his choices, but his understanding of loyalty, responsibility, and true strength.